The envelope arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, tucked neatly between bills and advertisements as if it belonged there. Agnes noticed it immediately, not because of its size, but because of its weight. Thick paper, embossed lettering, the kind of envelope that suggested importance, or at least the illusion of it. She stood by the hallway table for a moment, turning it over in her hands. Her name was written in elegant script. Not printed, written. That alone made her uneasy. Inside, she found a formal invitation. A private tour. A luxury senior residence. Complimentary lunch included. Agnes frowned. She hadn't signed up for anything like this. Then she saw the note clipped to the invitation. Already arranged everything. You'll love it. Daniel and Claire. Daniel, her stepson. Her fingers tightened slightly around the paper. For a few seconds, she simply stood there, listening to the quiet hum of the house. The same house she had lived in for nearly 4 decades. The same house she had painted, cleaned, repaired, and filled with memories, most of them tied to a man who was no longer there. Edward, her husband, gone just over a year now. Agnes placed the envelope down carefully, as if it might explode if handled too roughly. Something about it didn't sit right. Not the invitation itself, but the certainty behind it. Already arranged everything. Since when did they arrange things for her? The facility was located on the outskirts of town, where the city noise faded into manicured calm. Agnes had insisted on taking a cab. Daniel had offered to drive her, of course, too quickly, too eagerly, but she had declined. I'd rather go on my own, she had said. He hadn't argued. That, more than anything, bothered her. When the cab pulled up, Agnes stared at the place through the window. It didn't look like a nursing home. It looked like a hotel. Tall glass windows reflected the sky. The gardens were perfectly trimmed. A small fountain sat near the entrance, water flowing gently over polished stone. Everything was designed to soothe, to impress, to distract. Agnes paid the driver and stepped out slowly, her eyes scanning the building. For a brief moment, she wondered if she was overreacting. Maybe this really was just a thoughtful gesture. Maybe. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender. A young receptionist greeted her with a practiced smile. Welcome, Ms. Whitmore. We've been expecting you. Of course they had. Agnes signed in and was soon introduced to a guide, a cheerful woman who spoke with the smooth confidence of someone who had given the same tour 100 times. They walked through bright corridors and open lounges. Residents sat in comfortable chairs, some chatting, others staring quietly into space. Staff moved efficiently, always smiling, always polite. Here we focus on independence, the guide explained. Our residents maintain their lifestyle while receiving support when needed. Residents, not patients. Agnes noticed that. She noticed everything. The locked doors that required keycards. The subtle way staff hovered nearby. The way some of the residents didn't seem entirely present. It was beautiful, but it didn't feel like freedom. Halfway through the tour, they reached the garden. This is one of our most popular areas, the guide said. Many of our residents spend hours here. Agnes nodded politely, but her attention drifted. The garden reminded her too much of her own. The one she had built with her own hands. The one that still waited for her every morning. I think I'll sit for a moment, Agnes said. The guide smiled. Of course. I'll be just inside when you're ready to continue. Agnes sat on a bench near a row of white roses. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. Then she heard voices. Not loud, not meant to be overheard, but close enough. We need to move forward soon, a woman said. Agnes froze. That voice.
Claire.
She turned her head slightly, just enough to see around the corner of the building. Claire stood near the entrance, speaking to a man in a suit, likely an administrator. Her posture was relaxed, confident. Too confident. We've already discussed the financial side, Claire continued. Once the house is sold, everything will be covered. Agnes felt something cold settle in her chest. The house. Her house. She just needs a little push, Claire added with a soft laugh. She's stubborn, but she's slipping. It won't take much. The administrator hesitated. We still require her consent unless… Oh, we'll handle that, Claire interrupted smoothly. Daniel and I are taking care of everything. Agnes didn't move, didn't breathe. The words echoed in her mind. She just needs a little push. For a moment, everything felt unreal, as if she were watching someone else's life unfold. Claire's voice, once merely irritating, now sounded sharp, calculated. Agnes stepped back quietly, her heart pounding. She didn't wait for the guide, didn't finish the tour. She walked straight to the exit, each step steady despite the storm building inside her. Outside, the air felt different, colder, sharper. She stood near the curb, clutching her purse tightly, trying to steady herself. Daniel was already there, leaning against his car, scrolling through his phone. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. Hey, he said casually. Done already? That was quick. Agnes studied his face. The same boy she had helped raise. The same boy she had comforted after nightmares. The same boy who now stood there as if nothing was wrong. It was enough, she replied. He opened the passenger door for her. Pretty nice place, right? Agnes got in without answering. As the car pulled away, she looked back at the building. It shimmered in the sunlight. Perfect. Peaceful. A place designed to convince people they were choosing it, when in reality, some were being placed there. Daniel talked during the drive, but Agnes barely listened. Her mind replayed Claire's words over and over again. Sell the house. She's slipping. We'll handle that. Pieces began to fall into place. The sudden concern. The increased visits. The subtle comments about her memory. Had it already started? Had they been preparing this for weeks? Months? Agnes turned her gaze to the window. The streets passed by, familiar and comforting. But something had changed. Not outside. Inside. They thought she was weak. They thought she wouldn't notice. They thought she would simply agree. Agnes slowly tightened her grip on her purse. A quiet determination began to replace the shock. They had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated her. When they arrived home, Daniel walked her to the door. Claire will come by later, he said. We thought we'd have dinner together. Talk things through. Agnes nodded. Of course, she said calmly. He smiled, relieved. Good. I think this is the right step. Agnes watched him leave. Only when his car disappeared did she step inside and close the door. The house greeted her with silence. Familiar. Safe. Still hers. For now. She stood in the hallway for a long moment, then slowly walked into the living room. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same, because now she knew. This wasn't concern. It was a plan, and she was at the center of it. Agnes sat down in her chair and exhaled slowly. Fear was still there, but something else had appeared alongside it. Clarity. If they wanted a game, they had just invited the wrong opponent. That evening, I prepared dinner as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't just overheard my future being quietly rearranged without my permission. I moved through my kitchen with Briverchny Tochnesthew, slicing vegetables, setting the table, even lighting a candle, small details that once brought me comfort. But now every motion felt deliberate, like I was rehearsing a role. The role of a woman who didn't know she was being pushed out of her own life. When the doorbell rang, I didn't rush. I wiped my hands, checked my reflection, and only then opened the door. Daniel stood there with that same easy smile, Claire beside him holding a paper bag that smelled of expensive takeout. We brought something special, she said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. That alone was new. Claire had never behaved like this before. She used to hover politely at the edges of the room, never quite comfortable in my home. Now she moved like she belonged there, opening cabinets, pulling out plates as if she had memorized their locations. I watched quietly, saying nothing. Daniel set the food on the table and began talking immediately, filling the silence before it could grow uncomfortable. "We thought we'd spend more time together," he said. "You shouldn't be alone so much." I sat down slowly. "I'm not alone," I replied. "I have my routines." Claire laughed softly, too softly. "Routines are good," she said, "but people need more than routines, Agnes." There was again that tone. Gentle on the surface, but underneath it, something sharper. Something rehearsed. We began eating, and for a few minutes, everything felt almost normal. Almost. Daniel talked about work. Claire mentioned something about the twin school applications, and I listened, nodding when appropriate. But I could feel it building. The real reason they were here, waiting just beneath the surface of polite conversation. It came sooner than I expected. "So," Daniel said, setting his fork down, "what did you think about the place today?" I took a sip of water before answering. It was very polished. Claire smiled. "It's more than that. It's safe. Comfortable. You'd have people around you all the time." "I already have people around me," I said calmly. "Neighbors. Friends." Daniel exchanged a quick glance with her. "But they're not there all the time," he said. "That's the point." I leaned back slightly, studying him. "Is that what this is about? Time?" Claire reached across the table and placed her hand lightly on mine. The gesture felt staged. "Agnes, we're worried about you," she said. "You've seemed distracted lately." I met her eyes. "In what way?" She hesitated just long enough to make it look natural. "Little things. Forgetting appointments. Losing track of conversations." I didn't blink. "I haven't forgotten anything," I said evenly. Daniel cleared his throat. "Last week, you missed lunch with us." I almost smiled. There had been no lunch. "Did I?" I asked. Claire nodded gently. "It's nothing to be ashamed of. It happens." There it was again. Not an accusation, something worse. A suggestion. A seed. I let the silence stretch just a little longer than was comfortable. Then I said, "That's strange. I don't recall making plans." Daniel shifted in his chair. Claire's smile tightened for just a fraction of a second before returning. "That's exactly what we mean," she said softly. The conversation moved on, but the air had changed. I could feel it in every glance, every pause. They weren't here to ask. They were here to convince. After dinner, Claire insisted on helping me in the kitchen. Another first. Daniel disappeared into the living room, pretending to take a phone call. I stood at the sink while Claire dried dishes beside me, her movements careful, controlled. "You know," she said casually, "this house is a lot to manage." I didn't respond immediately. "I've managed it for years," I said finally. "Yes, but things change," she replied. "People change." I turned slightly to look at her. "Do they?" She smiled again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "We just want to make things easier for you." "By selling my house?" I asked. She didn't deny it. "It's not about the house," she said. "It's about your quality of life." I dried my hands slowly. "My life is here." Claire set the last plate down and faced me fully. "Your life can be somewhere better," she said quietly. When they left later that night, I locked the door behind them and stood there for a long time, listening to the silence. It wasn't comforting anymore. It felt watched, as if something had shifted in the foundation of the house itself. I walked through each room, noticing small details I might have ignored before. A chair slightly out of place. A drawer not fully closed. At the time, I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But the feeling stayed with me. The next morning, I found my pill organizer on the kitchen counter. I always kept it in the cabinet. Always. I opened it and frowned. The compartments were wrong. Pills mixed where they shouldn't be. For a moment, just a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. Had I made a mistake? Had I misplaced it myself? I stood there, staring at it, my heart beating a little faster. Then I closed it firmly. No. I knew my routines. I knew my habits. This wasn't confusion. This was something else. Over the next few days, the incidents continued. Small at first, easy to dismiss. My keys disappeared and then reappeared in a place I would never leave them. A bill went missing, only to show up later tucked into a cookbook. Each time, Daniel or Claire seemed to discover the mistake. Each time, they reacted with the same careful concern. "You have to be more careful," Daniel said one afternoon, holding up my keys. "This isn't like you." Claire would tilt her head sympathetically. "It's okay, Agnes. These things happen." And each time, I felt that same pressure building. Not from them, but from the implication behind their words. That maybe they were right. That maybe I was slipping. One evening, I walked into the kitchen and found the stove on. A pot sat empty, the metal slightly scorched. I stared at it, trying to remember. Had I turned it on? Had I forgotten? Before I could decide, the door opened and Claire stepped inside. "Oh my God," she said quickly, rushing to the stove and turning it off. "Agnes, this is exactly what we're talking about." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time I noticed something I had missed before. Not concern, not fear, satisfaction. That was the moment everything became clear. This wasn't happening to me. It was being done to me. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the house quiet around me. My thoughts were sharp now, focused. They had started small, subtle, testing boundaries, creating doubt, not just in me, but in anyone who might listen to them. Friends, doctors, neighbors. A narrative was forming piece by piece. And if I didn't stop it, it would become the truth. I leaned back in my chair, my hands steady now. Fear had been replaced by something colder, something stronger, understanding. They thought they were in control. They thought I was already losing. But they had overlooked one thing. I was still paying attention. And now, I was ready. The moment clarity settled in, fear stopped controlling me. It didn't disappear. It simply changed shape. It became sharper, more useful. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was observing. That shift made all the difference. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and began writing everything down. Times, dates, details. Every small incident that had made me question myself suddenly formed a pattern when placed side by side. The missing keys, the altered medication, the stove, the invented conversations. None of it was random. It was deliberate, structured, escalating. By the time I finished my first list, my hands were no longer shaking. They were steady, focused. I wasn't the one losing control. They were trying to take it. I spent that afternoon making quiet decisions. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't confront Claire. That would have been exactly what they expected, an emotional reaction they could twist into more evidence. Instead, I went out. Not far, just enough to think clearly away from the house. I sat in a small cafe near the edge of town, ordered tea I didn't drink, and planned. If they were building a story, I needed proof. Not opinions. Not arguments. Proof. Something undeniable. Something that didn't rely on anyone believing me. That was when the idea came to me, simple, almost obvious. If I couldn't trust what was happening when I wasn't looking, then I needed a way to see it. By evening, I had ordered small security cameras online. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would alert them. Devices designed to blend into ordinary objects, bookshelves, smoke detectors, even a clock. I chose carefully, placing the order under a different email account Daniel didn't know about. If he was monitoring anything, I wasn't going to make it easy for him. When I returned home, the house felt different again, but this time, not threatening. Quiet. Waiting. As if it understood what I was about to do. They came the next day, of course. Unannounced, as usual. Daniel knocked once before opening the door himself. That, too, had become a habit. "Hey, Agnes," he said casually, stepping inside like he owned the place. Claire followed, carrying another unnecessary gift. "We were in the area," she said with a smile. I returned the smile, calm and measured. "Of course you were." I watched them carefully as they moved through the house. Daniel drifted toward the living room, his eyes scanning. Claire went straight to the kitchen, opening drawers again. Searching. Checking. Confirming. I said nothing. I simply observed. Every movement now meant something. "Have you thought more about the residents?" Daniel asked, leaning against the doorway. I shrugged lightly. "I'm considering my options." That seemed to satisfy him, for now. Claire glanced at him briefly, then back at me. "We just want you to be safe," she said. "That's all that matters." Safe. The word lingered in the air, heavy with implication. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "Safety is very important." If she noticed the change in my tone, she didn't show it. After they left, I checked the house again. This time, I paid closer attention. A drawer slightly more open than before. A photo frame shifted just enough to notice. Small things, but now I knew they weren't accidents. They were signs. That evening, the cameras arrived. I didn't rush. I waited until nightfall, until the world outside settled into silence. Then I began. Each camera was placed with intention. One in the living room, angled toward the main entry and hallway. One in the kitchen, positioned to capture the stove and counters. Another near the hallway, where my bedroom door could be seen. I avoided private areas. This wasn't about invading space. It was about protecting it. When I finished, I sat down and connected everything to a secure system. The footage would upload automatically. No local storage. Nothing they could find or destroy. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to control. The first alert came sooner than I expected. The next afternoon, while I was out in the garden, my phone vibrated. Motion detected. I opened the app and watched. Daniel. He had used the emergency key. My chest tightened, but I stayed still, hidden behind the garden fence. I watched him move through my house like it was his. Opening cabinets. Checking drawers. His movements were quick, practiced. This wasn't the first time. Then he went to the kitchen counter. My pill organizer sat exactly where I had left it. He opened it. My breath caught. From his pocket, he took out a small container. He hesitated for only a second before switching 2 pills. Calm. Efficient. As if it were routine. I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. I watched. Every second. When he finished, he closed the organizer, glanced around once more, and left. Just like that. As if nothing had happened. I remained outside for several minutes, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with confirmation. I had been right. Every instinct, every doubt I had fought against. All of it was real. When I finally went back inside, I didn't touch the pills. I didn't even go near them. Instead, I sat down, replayed the footage, and watched it again. Slower this time. Every detail. Every movement. Then I saved it. Backed it up. Twice. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind was working. Fast. Focused. This was no longer suspicion. This was evidence. The next step had to be careful. Strategic. I couldn't confront them yet. Not without support. Not without protection. I needed someone who understood situations like this. Someone who knew the law, the risks, the consequences. The next morning, I began searching. Quietly. Methodically. It didn't take long to find what I needed, an attorney who specialized in elder rights, cases of manipulation, financial exploitation, coercion. The patterns were disturbingly familiar. I made the call from my landline, not my cell. "Good morning," a calm voice answered. "How can we help you?" I hesitated for only a second. "My name is Agnes," I said, "and I believe someone is trying to take control of my life." There was no surprise in her response.
No disbelief.
"I understand," she said gently. "Let's schedule a consultation." When I hung up, I felt something shift again. Not fear, not anger, something steadier, resolve. Later that day, Daniel called. "Hey," he said, "just checking in." I smiled faintly, even though he couldn't see it. "How thoughtful of you." "We're coming by tomorrow," he added. "We want to talk about next steps." Of course they did. I looked around my house, now filled with silent witnesses. "I'll be here," I said calmly. After the call ended, I sat in the living room, the quiet settling around me once more. But now it felt different. Not empty, not threatening.
Prepared.
They thought they were controlling the situation. They thought I was alone. They thought I was still confused. They were wrong. And soon, they would know exactly how wrong. By the time Daniel called to confirm their visit, I was no longer reacting to their moves. I was anticipating them. That shift gave me an advantage they didn't even realize I had. I spent the morning preparing, not in the way they expected. No anxious cleaning, no nervous pacing, but with calm precision. I reviewed the footage again, ensuring everything was saved securely. I made copies, stored them in multiple places, even emailed one version to an account only I could access. If anything happened, if they tried to take control suddenly, I wouldn't lose the truth. That mattered more than anything now. Truth was my only real protection. Before they arrived, I made one more call to the attorney I had spoken with the day before. His name was Mr. Carter. His voice had been steady, experienced, the kind that didn't panic because it had heard worse. I explained briefly what I had discovered, and there was a pause on the line, not of doubt, but of recognition. "This happens more often than people think," he said. "But the fact that you have video evidence changes everything." We agreed on a plan. I wouldn't confront Daniel and Claire alone. Not yet. Instead, I would let them continue, let them believe they were still in control. Meanwhile, he would begin preparing legal protection documents, safeguards, options. "When the moment comes," he told me, "you won't be standing alone." That was all I needed to hear. When the doorbell rang that afternoon, I felt nothing like fear, just focus. I opened the door, and there they were. Daniel with his careful concern, Claire with her practiced sympathy. "Agnes," she said warmly, stepping forward as if to embrace me. I allowed it, though it felt hollow. "We brought lunch," Daniel added, holding up a bag. Of course they did. They always brought something now. Gifts, food, gestures, tools disguised as kindness. I stepped aside.
Come in.
They settled into the living room, but I noticed something immediately. They weren't relaxed. There was tension beneath their movements, a subtle urgency. They were ready to push further. I could see it in the way Daniel sat forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. Claire remained poised, but her eyes moved constantly, scanning, calculating. "We've been thinking," Daniel began, and I almost smiled. That phrase had become their opening line.
About what?
I asked calmly. He glanced at Claire before continuing. "About what's best for you." There it was again. Always framed as concern, never as control. Claire leaned slightly toward me. "Agnes, we've noticed things getting worse," she said softly. "The confusion. The safety issues." I tilted my head slightly. "Have you?" She nodded. "The stove incident, your medication, these aren't small things." I let a moment of silence pass. Then I said, And you're certain those things happened the way you think they did? Daniel frowned slightly. What do you mean? I met his eyes. I mean, are you sure I was the one responsible? That question unsettled them more than any accusation could have. I saw it immediately. Claire's smile faltered just for a second. Daniel shifted in his seat. Agnes, he said carefully, this is exactly what we're talking about. Denial is part of it. Denial. The word was chosen deliberately. Clinical. Strategic. I nodded slowly. I see. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. We've taken the next step, she said. We've arranged an evaluation. A professional assessment. Daniel added quickly. It's just to help you. To understand what's going on. Without my consent. Without my involvement. They had already decided. I looked at the folder, but didn't take it. You've been busy, I said quietly. Claire's voice softened even more. We're doing this because we care. I almost believed her for a fraction of a second, but then I remembered the footage. The pills. The stove. The calculated lies. Care had nothing to do with it. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Daniel looked confused. Are you expecting someone? He asked. I stood up slowly. Yes, I said. I am. When I opened the door, Mr. Carter stood there, calm and composed, a leather briefcase in his hand. Behind him was another woman, a medical professional I recognized from our earlier conversation, Dr. Hayes. They stepped inside without hesitation. The shift in the room was immediate. Daniel stood up abruptly. What is this? He demanded. Mr. Carter set his briefcase down calmly. Good afternoon, he said. My name is Robert Carter. I represent Agnes. Claire's expression changed completely. The softness vanished. What remained was sharp and defensive. Represent, she repeated. For what? I closed the door behind them. For me, I said simply. Silence filled the room. Then Daniel spoke, his voice tight. Agnes, what's going on? I walked past him and picked up the remote from the table. You wanted to discuss my condition, I said. I think it's time we look at the full picture. I turned on the television. The screen lit up, and within seconds, the footage began playing. Daniel entering the house. Opening drawers. Moving with quiet familiarity. Claire turning on the stove. Standing back. Waiting. Daniel switching the pills. Precise. Careful. Undeniable. No words were needed. The room changed completely. The illusion they had built collapsed in seconds. Claire was the first to react. This is taken out of context, she said quickly. You're misunderstanding. Am I? I interrupted calmly. Daniel's face had gone pale. Agnes, we were trying to help, he said. You don't understand. No, I said quietly. I understand perfectly. Mr. Carter stepped forward slightly. What you're seeing, he said, constitutes clear evidence of manipulation and medical interference. Both are serious legal matters. Claire's composure cracked. This is ridiculous, she snapped. We were protecting her. Dr. Hayes spoke then, her voice calm but firm. Replacing prescribed medication with unauthorized substances is not protection. It's dangerous. Daniel looked between them, panic beginning to surface. We didn't mean, intent doesn't erase action, Mr. Carter said. I watched them carefully. Not with anger. Not anymore. Just clarity. You tried to make me doubt myself, I said. You tried to rewrite my reality. Claire shook her head, but she had no words left. Daniel looked at me, his voice softer now. Agnes, please. For a brief moment, I saw the boy I had once known, but it was gone just as quickly, replaced by someone else. Someone capable of this. I took a slow breath. You're not welcome here anymore, I said. Either of you. The words landed heavily. Final. Claire laughed bitterly. You can't just cut us out. I held her gaze. Watch me. Mr. Carter opened his briefcase and handed Daniel a document. "This is a formal notice," he said. "You are no longer permitted to enter this property without explicit permission. Any further attempts to interfere will be documented and pursued legally." Daniel stared at the paper, his hands trembling slightly.
Claire didn't take it.
She didn't need to. She already understood. They had lost control.
Completely.
Without another word, they turned and walked toward the door. Daniel hesitated for just a second, as if he wanted to say something, but he didn't. Then they were gone. The silence that followed was different from anything I had felt before. Not empty, not heavy.
Clear.
I turned off the television slowly. My hands were steady. My thoughts even steadier. Dr. Hayes gave me a small nod. "You handled that well," she said. Mr. Carter closed his briefcase. "This isn't over," he added. "But the hardest part is behind you." I nodded. I knew that. This wasn't the end. But it was the turning point. For the first time since all of this began, I wasn't defending my life anymore. I was reclaiming it. After they left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt reclaimed. That was the first thing I noticed. Not silence, but ownership. Every object, every corner, every quiet detail belonged to me again, not as something waiting to be taken, but as something firmly rooted in my control. I stood in the living room for a long time after the door closed behind Daniel and Claire, letting that feeling settle into something real. It wasn't victory in the way people imagine it. There was no triumph, no sudden relief.
It was steadier than that.
Grounded. Earned. I had faced something I didn't want to believe was happening, something that would have been easier to ignore, and I had chosen not to look away. That choice had changed everything. Mr. Carter didn't leave immediately. He stayed long enough to walk me through the next steps, and unlike Daniel and Claire, he didn't rush, didn't push. He explained things clearly, what had already been set in motion, what protections were now in place, what options I had moving forward. My finances would be secured under my direct authority, additional safeguards would be added to prevent unauthorized access, and a formal record of what had happened would be documented in case they ever tried again. "You've done the most important part," he told me. "You recognized what was happening and acted before it went too far." I nodded, though part of me still struggled with that truth. It had already gone far, just not far enough to take everything. Dr. Hayes spoke next, her tone calm but firm. "I'll complete a full independent report confirming your cognitive health," she said.
No ambiguity.
No room for interpretation. That mattered. Not because I doubted myself anymore, but because I understood how easily narratives could be twisted if left unchallenged. Facts mattered. Documentation mattered. Reality needed to be recorded when others tried to rewrite it. When they finally left, I locked the door and leaned against it for a moment, closing my eyes. Not from exhaustion, but from release. The tension that had been building quietly for weeks, maybe longer, had finally broken. Not all at once, but enough for me to breathe again. I walked through the house slowly after that, not searching this time, not checking for signs of intrusion, but simply being present. The kitchen felt like mine again. The living room no longer carried that subtle sense of observation. Even the small things, the way the light fell through the windows, the faint creak of the floorboards, felt familiar in a way they hadn't for weeks. I hadn't realized how much of that feeling I had lost until it came back. The next few days were quieter than I expected.
No sudden visits.
No calls filled with concern. No attempts to explain or justify. Daniel did call once, but I didn't answer. I let it ring, then stopped, then ring again later. I wasn't ready to hear his voice. Not because I was angry, but because I understood something clearly now. Some distances, once created, cannot be closed quickly. Trust isn't something you rebuild with words. It requires something deeper. Something he had already broken. Claire didn't call at all. That didn't surprise me. She had never been as emotionally invested as Daniel pretended to be. For her, this had been a plan. And once the plan failed, there was nothing left to say. I focused instead on rebuilding something else, not what they had tried to take, but what I had almost lost myself in the process. Confidence. Not the loud kind, not the kind that needs to prove anything, but the quiet certainty that I could trust my own mind, my own perception, my own decisions. That had been the most dangerous part of what they did. Not the manipulation itself, but the doubt it created. That moment in the kitchen, staring at the stove, wondering if I had made a mistake, that had been the real threat. Because once you stop trusting yourself, everything else becomes easier to take. I refused to let that happen again. I began making small changes not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. I changed the locks, not out of fear, but out of principle. I updated my financial accounts, added layers of security, ensured that every decision required only my approval. I organized my documents, not because they were disordered, but because I wanted clarity. Control, I realized, wasn't about resisting others. It was about understanding your own boundaries and reinforcing them when necessary. That understanding came slowly, but it stayed. Weeks passed, and with them came something unexpected: space. Not emptiness, but room to move, to think, to exist without pressure. I started leaving the house more, not because I needed distraction, but because I wanted connection on my own terms. I visited the community center, signed up for a painting class I had once considered, but never pursued. I met people who didn't see me as someone to manage or protect, but simply as someone present. That difference mattered more than I expected. Conversations were lighter, genuine, uncalculated. I found myself laughing again, not forced, not polite, but real. It felt unfamiliar at first, then natural. One afternoon, while working in my garden, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. They hadn't just tried to take my home. They had tried to redefine my life, reduce it to something smaller, controlled,
Contained.
and for a brief moment, they had almost succeeded, not in action, but in perception. That was the real danger. Not what they did, but what I almost believed. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me aware. Awareness, I learned, is stronger than anger. It doesn't fade. It stays. It sharpens your ability to see things clearly the next time. Daniel tried again weeks later. This time he didn't call. He came to the door. I saw him through the window before he knocked. He looked different. Not physically, but in posture. Less certain. Less controlled. I opened the door, but I didn't step aside. "Agnes," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I looked at him for a moment, not searching for the boy I had known, but recognizing the man he had become.
"We are talking," I said.
He hesitated. "I made mistakes," he said. "We both did." I didn't respond immediately. Not because I didn't hear him, but because I wasn't sure what those words meant anymore. "I need time," I said finally. It wasn't rejection. It wasn't forgiveness. It was truth. He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than he expected. Then he left. That was enough for now. Claire never returned, and that, too, was enough. Months later, I found myself sitting on the porch in the evening, watching the sky shift colors the way it always had. Some things don't change. Not because they can't, but because they don't need to. The house stood exactly as it always had, but I saw it differently now. Not just as a place filled with memories, but as something I had defended, protected, chosen. That made it stronger in a way it had never been before. I thought about everything that had happened, not with bitterness, but with clarity. People talk about betrayal as something loud, obvious, but it rarely is. It's quiet.
Постепенное.
It builds in small moments, small shifts, small justifications. And if you're not paying attention, it becomes something much larger before you realize it's there. I had been paying attention. Late, perhaps, but not too late. In the end, they had tried to take control of my life. Instead, They had forced me to reclaim it more completely than I ever had before. And that was something they could never take away.